Hello, I'm Roger Baker, Executive Director of the Stratfor Center for Applied Geopolitics at RANE. This podcast is brought to you by RANE Worldview, the premier digital publication for objective geopolitical intelligence and analysis. Find out how RANE can help you stay ahead of global events at ranenetwork.com.
This is the Essential Geopolitics podcast from RANE. I'm Emily Donahue. Welcome aboard. Today, we're going to talk about Brazil. Brazil has the largest economy in South America. In fact, it's the 9th largest economy in the world. And as big as it is, it would be amazing if Brazil did not have some internal political divisions. Of course, its flamboyantly conservative President Bolsonaro has made headlines during the last few years, but now he's facing a challenger for his job. In fact, there's a presidential election in just about 3 months. Carmen Colosi can guide us through what's happening. She's a Latin America analyst with RANE. Welcome, Carmen.
Thank you so much for having me, Emily.
It's always a pleasure to have you here. Can you give me some background on the two candidates for president and why anybody should be paying attention?
Sure. So first we have Jair Bolsonaro. He is the current Brazilian president, was elected back in 2018 and has served in Congress for a very, very long time. So kind of somewhat of a career politician on paper, but in actuality, he's been, quite an outsider voice. So he's not really gotten along with people in his coalitions. And he is well known for his kind of bombastic rhetoric. The other main presidential candidate is Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva, who is very commonly known as Lula. So Lula is, again, a career politician. He served as president previously and is really well known for his work in the labor unions. He himself was a kind of union leader and really came to power on the back of the labor vote in Brazil. Now, these two candidates are most likely going to be the two leading candidates in the presidency. There are a few other ones that are polling at a very, very small percentage, but really, unless there is a large and kind of seismic event in Brazil, one of the two is going to be Brazil's next president. Now, Brazil, as you mentioned, is the one of the largest economies in Latin America, and the country has really been experiencing a significant slow in its economic growth. So, of course, the economy slowed during COVID, but it's been really difficult for Brazil in these past couple years. Last year, Brazil saw a kind of a post-COVID boom of 5%, but this year, the economy is projected only to grow 0.6%. And even in next year, in 2023, we're likely to have a very small percentage of growth. So the question here is, will Brazil's next president really be able to push the country into a better economic position, or will Brazil kind of fall in terms and relations with its other top economies around the world?
Wow, that's pretty dramatic. What can you tell me about concerns that I've heard that the election is being defined as fraudulent? Where's that coming from?
That's a great question. So there's a few different mechanisms here that are pushing this narrative that the elections could be fraudulent. First is Bolsonaro himself. So he, for a very long time, has pushed a narrative that the courts, the electoral institutions are rigged against him, that the electronic voting system that the country uses should be replaced with a paper ballot system, that would be more credible. And Bolsonaro has honestly made some quite brash statements, saying things like, the only entity that can remove me from the presidency is a god. So these kind of discussions are things that are really pandering towards the second driver, which is the fact that Brazil is facing high levels of mis and disinformation being spread over a multitude of apps, but mainly WhatsApp and Telegram messaging apps. And these are not just small, stories that are going around. These are large, manufactured misinformation campaigns that really do favor Bolsonaro over Lula. There is some pro-leftist disinformation campaigns, but the majority is really in favor of Bolsonaro. And so when he comes out with these kind of large and bombastic statements, that's really kind of feeding into the amount of misinformation that is circulating online and in Brazil. The third driver is an interesting one. It's the military. So the military, ever since the dictatorship, essentially said that they were not going to interfere in elections. And this is the first year that the military has kind of raised their concerns about vulnerabilities in the voting system. This is an interesting aspect in that it really kind of does lend a bit of concern to us here at RANE that if the military is kind of raising these concerns, there could be a plot or an agreement to push a broader narrative around the voting system in Brazil.
So talk about some signposts that we should be looking out for if, in fact, the results of the election were to be contested.
Sure. To look at this, I really would like to start with looking at the polling. Current polls put Lula about 15 to 19 points ahead of Bolsonaro. So this is quite a significant margin, quite a significant amount. But we do see Bolsonaro trying to do things to, again, push economic stimulus, like the economic stimulus package they passed last week on the 13th, that could sway some middle and lower income voters towards Bolsonaro. So again, we are 3 months out. We could see Bolsonaro rise in the polls. If Bolsonaro's chances do rise in the polls and the election becomes a closer race, that could be something where it would be a lot more credible for Bolsonaro to potentially contest the election and have that be a credible kind of idea in many people's minds than if it was by a wider margin. The second are the electoral institutions. When you look at the electoral institutions, they're being led by very independent people. So these are people that are not really willing to be swayed. Great example of this is that the Superior Electoral Court is going to be led by Supreme Court Justice Alexandra de Moraes. And de Moraes is Supreme Court Justice that is fairly impartial, fairly able to push back against Bolsonaro. So that does create potential tensions between Bolsonaro and the electoral institutions, but that really does mean that the electoral institutions are not likely to be swayed by the Bolsonaro administration. The third is the military, like I talked about earlier. The military has come out with some concerns about the voting system, but we've seen time and time again from top military commanders that they are not willing to really get involved in the outcome of the election. So many are saying, well, we do have these concerns ahead of the election, we're not willing to get involved in the aftermath. So that is something that we're really looking at, of saying that, okay, because we do have this understanding that the military is not willing and ready to support a contested election and kind of push that narrative, that's something that we're not likely to see. Again, if any of these three factors start to shift ahead of the election, that's something where we could see a potential contested election scenario, and not just a contested election, but an election that could be potentially overturned depending on how much these factors do shift.
Wow, Carmen, that's a lot going on in 3 months. We'll check back with you soon on that. Thanks, Carmen.
Thank you so much for having me, Emily.
Carmen Colosi is a Latin America analyst with RANE. You can read about Brazil's election in RANE Worldview. That is RANE's geopolitical intelligence solution. Learn about RANE's risk management products like RANE Worldview at ranenetwork.com. That's RANE network.com. I'm Emily Donahue, and I thank you for listening.